that's not why I love you, Dave.
We're not going to talk about any of that.
We're not going to talk about that at all.
Hi, I'm Jim O'Shaughnessy, and welcome to Infinite Loops. Sometimes we get caught up in what feel like infinite loops when trying to figure things out. Markets go up and down, research is presented and then refuted, and we find ourselves right back where we started. The goal of this podcast is to learn how we can reset our thinking on issues that hopefully leaves us with a better understanding as to why we think the way we think and how we might be able to change that to avoid going in infinite loops of thought. We hope to offer our listeners a fresh perspective on a variety of issues and look at them through a multifaceted lens, including history, philosophy, art, science, linguistics, and yes, also through quantitative analysis. And through these discussions, help you not only become a better investor, but also become a more nuanced thinker. With each episode, we hope to bring you along with us as we learn together. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode of Infinite Loops.
Jim O'Shaughnessy is Chairman and Co-Chief Investment Officer of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management, where Jamie Catherwood is an associate. All opinions expressed by Jim, Jamie, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Well, hello, everybody. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with another episode of Infinite Loops, and I cannot tell you how much I was looking forward to today's guest. It is my friend, Dave Nadig, a pioneer in the ETF world. You are currently the Chief Investment Officer, the Director of Research for ETFtrends.com. You're the author of a book about ETFs, but that's not why I love you, Dave.
We're not going to talk about any of that.
We're not going to talk about that at all. And so I got a DM from Dave a few days before this podcast, and he's like, so, what are we going to talk about? I'll do, lessons from the pandemic. I'll do deep dive on Jed McKenna. I'll do the favorite blues guitarist, whatever you want to do. That is why I love you, sir. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I will admit a rare moment of crippling imposter syndrome given your previous guest list, but our mutual friend Tom Morgan talked me off the ledge.
Well, so we're gonna start, I think, with the piece you wrote, which I think is brilliant. We'll get to it in a minute, but it made me, how I'm I realize my own memory is lying to me like every day, and that's why I keep all these journals. And so after I did the podcast with Tom, where, he developed his thesis about, love and that's what binds the world and everything, which I thought was really interesting. I kind of thought, I think I wrote something about that. And so I go back and I find, and by the way, 27, 24-year-old Jim, way smarter than 61-year-old Jim. So anyway, I love doing science fiction treatments. And I found it, and it was, I think, from 1988, so that would have made me 28. And it was, I'll just give you the real brief theme. The theme was that very advanced aliens were opening up a window onto Earth for a brief period of time to see whether we were ready to ascend to a higher order. And in the treatment, I said that the last window started in the kind of mid-60s. And by the way, right before I was coming on with you, I'm listening to the Amboy Dukes' Journey to the Center of Your Mind. If you watch music videos from 1966 through about 1970, whatever, hello!
Trippy stuff, yeah.
So he calls it a phase change. And so I found the treatment, I'm like, by the way, I had in the treatment that our dear friend Richard Nixon slammed that shut. He found out about it. Slammed it shut. And that was the reason that he arrested and made a example of Timothy Leary.
Oh, I love it. I love it
yeah,
because he was our true progenitor. Got it. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. But honestly, I do kind of think there is something to this notion that there are phase changes, as Tom calls it. I call it the Great Reshuffle. Everyone's got a different name for it. But when I read your piece that you called Metaverse, Brave New World, or the Capitalist Hellscape, I thought, hey, it was very good, by the way. But I wanted to use that as our jumping off point because I think we're in I think the window's open again.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that the window is opening and I do, some of it's generational. I think that's one interesting way of thinking about this. I'm a big fan of Neil Howe, generational theory, wrote the Fourth Turning, probably got a little more press than he wanted to around the last election. Currently writes for Hedgeye, but I read his stuff religiously. And one of the things that he really beats home is that every generation is brand new. Right. Everybody thinks that they've invented everything. And every generation effectively does invent everything all over again. And it's really easy to be on this side of the generational gap. I won't say which side we might be on, but the other side of the generational gap.
We are olds.
Yes, we are olds. We're on the other side. Well, I'm on the edge. I'm technically not a boomer because I'm just young enough that I'm a Gen Xer, but I'm a cusp, so I'm an okay cusp boomer. But I do think there's some truth to that you see the generations like that are younger than you reinventing things that you feel like you've been through before. And it's so easy. I feel that emotional knee-jerk reaction to be like, well, these kids today, what are they, get off my lawn. Like, I feel it. Like, that's a real thing. That is not made up culture. That is a real thing. The Simpsons had it right. Old man yells at cloud. But the reality is, I think it's incredibly important when you see those moments of invention happening a generation younger than you. That's the future. You are witnessing the future being manufactured in real time. So to dismiss that is the worst kind of delusion. I think you have to wade deeply into it. And I think that's what the metaverse is.
Yeah, I agree. And so I, for one, I'm thrilled. I just think that this new world that's unfolding, yes, it will have all sorts of problems. No question. All worlds do. But I had Matt Clifford on, who did a thesis that was essentially after Napoleon, right, tried to take over all of Europe and crown himself emperor, like the Western democracies were kind of like, we might want to dampen the variance a little bit here. And so they created like a host of variance dampening institutions, right? So a very ambitious guy like Napoleon, instead of, having a long war and then having the inspiration for a bloody revolution that killed even the people who were in favor of it, everyone was like, wait a tick, let's bring this down. Let's give the Napoleons of the world a ladder to climb. Let's say, no, you're going to go to Oxbridge or Yale and Harvard, then you're going to join McKinsey, then you're going to be a partner, everything's going to be great. And, so we saw this compression. And then we throw the world's greatest, history's greatest variance amplifier into the mix, the internet.
Yeah. Well, and it's been, and look, there's a certain crew of us, right? There's some of us are in financial Twitter, some of us are in the cognitive sciences field, some of us come from religious backgrounds, but there's a crew of folks on the internet that debate all of these things. And on the one hand, I think it's important that we acknowledge what a ridiculous sign of privilege it is to have the time and the mental space to be able to even think about these things as opposed to food, water, family, health, right? So putting aside, we need to acknowledge our ridiculous privilege to even be part of that discussion. I think you're right. I think this is an important thing to monitor, but where I diverge from that crew a little bit, I'm pretty deeply uninterested in trying to point out why where we are is broken. Like that sort of recidivist history business, I understand the reaction. I hit a delete on hundreds of tweet replies and messages that I don't send because there is this sense of like somebody is wrong on the internet about something that happened that I witnessed or that I was part of or that I'm deeply read on, right? You're deeply read on Napoleon. You could talk about that forever. I've become less and less interested in that. Not because I think it's unimportant or it's uninteresting. I just don't think I personally have much of an effect by wading into that. And I think it's much more interesting to focus on what's being built than what was built and broke. And there's a lot of what was built and broke. And we could spend we have spent a lot of time talking about things that are broken and why they're broken. And your whole podcast with Tom Morgan about like how we've created a world that like exacerbates the left brain hyper-focused dominance. And those are super interesting discussions. But every day I wake up and this is where I live. And I don't live then, I live now, and I'm trying to get to tomorrow.
Oh man, no wonder that we are brothers from different mothers, I guess, because that also is the distillation, I think, of the combination of Stoicism and Taoism, and it's basically I always put up that Oppenheimer quote: "Of course, the world's going to hell, and the only thing that we can do to stop it is to not try to do anything to stop it." Right? So yeah. I like you. Obviously want to focus more on all the cool shit that I see happening every day, because you're right, we have enormous privilege. But one of the things that I see happening as well is that the internet is killing geography, time, and space. And it is giving people, just regular folks, for the first time in human history, the ability, if they're talented, to have somebody A, notice that talent, that B, hire them or subscribe to their Substack or whatever.
And you guys have leaned heavy into this, right? You've hired a bunch of people you've never met at this point, right? And at our firm, we've done the same thing. I mean, we've hired, dozens of people in the pandemic, and I don't think any of them live anywhere near where we used to have offices. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that the challenging part for me, though, like not to beat this horse to death, but I really want to push you forward on this, Jim, is, when we talk about things like the metaverse, like let's bring it back to that for a second. Sure. I think when guys of our age and, hair and color and socioeconomic status start talking about stuff like this, we need to understand we're carrying that baggage into that conversation. And so when we say something even remotely critical about somebody's DeFi project or the next token idea that somebody has, the immediate reaction is and should be, well, these are just olds. They don't care about this. They're just resisting change. And I really want to push against that, because what I see when I look at what's going on inside the metaverse as a large topic or any individual project is a tremendous amount of good intention. Right? You talk to most folks who are really maximalist about this Web 3.0 stuff. You talk to the NFT guys, you get they're fired up about artist rights. They're fired up about residuals. They're like, their heart's in all the right places. And so when I contribute to those discussions at the tiny level I might be able to, and I have something to bring, often what folks like us have to bring is not history, but reality. Like, this is what the regulatory environment looks like today. This is how trading in custody works today. Not like this is how we used to do it, and therefore we should always do it that way. But if you don't understand the state of play, you can't change it. And I feel like that's where guys like us have a little bit of an opportunity to contribute, because I think we have a really strong understanding of the state of play when we woke up this morning. And you have to start where you wake up. You don't get to start yesterday.
That is a great point. And just on one side of that point, by the way, I agree with everything you've just said. I always am trying to look forward. I'm always trying to say, okay, so what's the logical end state here, right? Mm-hmm. I did it with Netfolio, which became Canvas. But that was all around the lines of like, one of my little thought exercises that I like to play is, okay, so what we now have this technology, right? This technology is going to enable, in my opinion, it's going to enable regular people to be treated like the ultra rich were treated like a century ago, right? And so when you start thinking that way, well, the ultra rich all had drivers or carriage men, right? Uber. Well, the ultra rich had all of these homes scattered all around the world. Airbnb. Well, the ultra rich had their portfolio managed specifically for them. Hello, Canvas. Right. And so on and so on. So one of the things that you touch on in the article is this idea that what you see happening, I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is the idea that if we're looking at where end states are, which begin as new beginnings then, right?
Right.
If you, the beginning of infinity, right? We never have a settled model. We always are moving forward, which is
Right.
fantastic. But one of the things that you mention is everything going to ultimately just turn into a token?
Yeah, I actually am a big fan of this idea. And I think I'm trying to think when my first aha moment on tokenization maybe. So I used to say this at the very beginning of the internet, like back in the 80s, I had a Plato terminal. I mean, like talk about ancient, right? 85, something like that.
Right.
It was very proto ARPANET access, right? And I already hated passwords then. Like this is like all I had was passwords to mainframe computers on the UMass campus. And I already hated how many freaking passwords I had to have. And so I would say for years, like at some point, somebody's going to put a chip in my thumb. And that's the only dang thing I'm ever going to need. And what we're talking about now with tokenization is really just the logical extension of that. We're just saying, look, you don't even need to physically instantiate these things. We've got the encryption down. We've got the technology down. We believe the global internet is strong enough to let these things be virtualized. You don't need to put the chip in your thumb anymore. Now, there are lots of people still trying to put chips in people's thumbs and, and all that. And I read an article yesterday about a guy who's trying to, implant vaccine status chips and people like whatever. Yeah, sure. People will still do that. But there is something about this idea of having your identity not be you, but be something you control. This is my problem with biometrics is I don't really want to use biometrics for my identity. I understand why there's a level of certainty you get with it, but I don't really want to scan my fingerprint every time I open up a computer or my phone or anything else. Or I don't really want it to scan my face because what if I'm dead, right? What I really want is an interaction with some sort of virtual object that only I can control. And that's really what tokenization does. And when you extend the idea of, oh, tokens are just these virtual objects that you can put attributes against, all of a sudden the world starts opening up a lot. I did a bunch of work in 2003-ish, I did some consulting work for a computer security company of all things, and got to do a lot of work with the Department of Defense on their CAC cards, which were their smart cards 15 years ago. And there was a lot of development work going on. Like, what can we do with this? We now have this smart identity for every member of the DoD and all the contractors and everything else. And that was the opening for them. For a lot of those applications, because it moved from I have a thing I can get in the door to oh, wait a minute, this physical card I have also gives me access to a SCIF, and it also gives me access to a specific file in a specific computer system in that SCIF. And oh, by the way, because I use my CAC card to authenticate to that file now knows this CAC card read that file, right? So the tokenization happens on the other side too. So those were some big aha moments. And I honestly have no idea whether the NSA finished any of that stuff. None of that was classified, but that's where the development was already going 15 years ago. And when I look at what's going on now in the crypto space, that's when it gets really exciting. The problem for me is 90% of the use cases I see, I still think are kind of silly and boring. And I think the more interesting stuff is yet to come. Right? I mean, talk to me when I can actually have an NFT that does something really useful for me, like let me pay for my Starbucks meal. Like we're not even close to those things yet. These are really straightforward use cases of having a coupon or a prepaid account somewhere. Like these are really basic use cases for identity, and we're not even there.
Yeah, I agree, and think that that use case, making them useful, is like, come on, let's get there. I kind of enjoy watching the excitement though.
For sure.
Yeah, right? Like so Infinite Loops, we sold our first NFT.
I know, I bid on it. I knew I couldn't possibly afford it, but I made sure I was the first goddamn bid. I think I bid like 0.5 Ether or something on it.
Yeah, but what's so cool about that is you just learn so much more about it by doing it, right? And
yeah,
we had a lot of fun doing it. We're going to give the money to charity. I mean, the guy who bought it is actually going to give the slot on Infinite Loops to somebody who he thinks like hasn't been able to break through yet, but he thinks has like a huge amount of potential. I mean, the kindness implicit in that. I mean, it's just, to me, I was like, my wife was asking me about it. I'm like, I think it kind of went as well as it possibly could have. And so
yeah.
Go.
Your comment about the kindness in that community, like that resonates really strongly with me. Now, I say this also having a lot of evidence that the toxicity we see out of, I'll use the phrase bro, I guess, around this. There is a group of the crypto community which has just been awful to a lot of the young women I know in this industry, and they should all just go die in a fire and there's no excuses. But in general, this has been an incredibly fun community to even be part of the edges of, because it is kind and it's open and people put their ideas out there. And this is a community that the crypto community in general, that understands execution is everything and the ideas are free. And like NFTs are the perfect example about that. It has nothing to do with what the art is. It has to do with the execution of your idea, of your project, as the term goes, right? And the people who are putting these projects together often have never met. They're sitting in Discord channels, chatting with each other, doing stuff with their, like contributing their time to stuff they think is interesting. That feels a lot like the early internet to me. That feels a lot like 1989, 90, 91, 92. Which was I was on a bunch of standards bodies then. It was great. And everybody was just contributing openly. It was the beginning of the open source movement a little bit later. But it got co-opted so fast. And that's why I wrote that article, was there is this tendency for these beautiful moments of creation to be just subsumed by capitalism so quickly, particularly America's version of capitalism. This is not necessarily the case where things develop outside the country. And that's what concerns me. That's the part I want to put a finger in, because I feel like, no, I can't move the needle. I can't change regulation and politics. But if a couple of these projects can go down their paths, understanding that, yeah, regulators are going to pay attention and this is what they're going to ask. And, oh, yeah, there's a whole ecosystem over here that you've not even looked at yet, but that's how money actually moves around. You need to understand that. So if I can do anything to help folks understand those things, to in some way maybe prevent that co-option of some of the beautiful ideas in here, then, I'll die happy. If I can just move the needle a little tiny bit there.
Exactly. I'm reading a book you might actually enjoy, because it takes it flips many of the bad capitalism memes on their head. It's called The Genius of the Beast, A Radical Revision of Capitalism by Howard Bloom. And he essentially says in his introduction that, hey, all those things that the religions promised, that you were going to be happy, that you were going to have a wonderful home, that you were going to have clean drinking water, you're going to have all that. Oh, yeah, that all got delivered by capitalism. and none by the religions, by the way. The religions tended to, like burning people at stake.
So you just opened a door there we got to walk through. Okay, so if we're going to say that capitalism is the thing that has delivered on all of these promises, we have to I apologize to the audience. Now we have to bring this back to Ian McGilchrist and the piece you did with Tom Morgan, because what I would argue is that is true if you define the expected outputs of religion as a laundry list of items that can be discreetly identified. That is very left brain thinking. The very best part of Ian McGilchrist's 1,500 word tome, The Matter with Things, is the chapter on paradoxes, which is like, page 850, right in the middle. He goes through this incredible, like Herman Melville on Wales categorization of every kind of paradox that screws up human brains. Right. And in each one of those, he sort of breaks it down to the reason this seems like a paradox or an optical illusion, same thing, right, is that your left brain is trying to parse something into discrete steps and your right brain is trying to think about this as a holism, and they don't match. Zeno's paradox is the very best one of these, right? Because your left brain is saying, well, no, but I can divide it in half again. I can still get closer. And your right brain is sitting here going, well, no, you're there. Right. And that's precisely the problem with thinking about capitalism and religion as somehow collections of humanly desirable outcomes like happiness.
Oh, well, yeah, I just did a thread on happiness. I think personally that happiness is not a thing itself that can be achieved or sought. I believe that it is a byproduct of other things. In other words, to be happy, you can't just say, oh, gee, I want to be happy. It's a bit like people wanting to manifest things. I just have to sit on my couch here and I'm going to be like a billionaire, and because I'm manifesting it. No, that doesn't work. Does the idea of like premeditating things, thinking things through, uniting into imbued intuition with the right or the left brain way of thinking? Yeah, I think that does work, but it's like knowledge without action is futile. Action without knowledge is foolish, right? So the other reason, and I knew that was going to be your reaction, so
You baited me.
I did. Well, like Robert Anton Wilson says, if you think for just a moment, maybe I'm just a cosmic schmuck, you are, for at least that little tiny moment, a little less of a cosmic schmuck.
Oh my God.
But so what you're going to like if you ever do read this book by Bloom is he totally agrees with you.
Okay, good.
So for example, I've been reading a ton about complex adaptive learning systems, and like the insight that I'm sure you already know is trying to work with a complex adaptive system from the top down is a very left-brained idea, and it doesn't work, right? Complex adaptive systems are emergent behaviors come from below, not from.
Well, what you just described is the current belief about neuroscience too. I mean, the ultimate complex adaptive system is the human brain, and the balance that we're fighting right now in neuroscience is between those two models, right? There's the reductive constructionalist physicalist version of this, and then there's the much more holistic version of it. And those things often seem like they're in direct scientific conflict, which is part of why I find it so interesting. The idea that sort of capitalism or the political system or our modern culture are just expressions of our sort of core genetic imperatives being rolled out to their natural conclusions. That's one that's been, that's almost a bit of an old saw at this point. Certainly for people who read this kind of BS, like people have been talking about that quite a bit. I think the part that I find most interesting is how much the problems are the same no matter where you look for the solutions. Like what I mean by that is the problems with capitalism, the way you're describing this book, which I have not read, and thinking about it as the solution to this laundry list of problems and that sort of breaking things down narrowly versus thinking holistically. Like the first time I started encountering those problems was when I got diagnosed with epilepsy 30 years ago, because that's how my neurologist started describing what was going on in my brain to me, this sort of battle between these sort of narrow physical specific structures in my brain that they can point to and say, oh, on the MRI, well, that's screwed. Sorry, Dave. And by the way, that's why when you have a seizure, you have time displacement as your aura before you have a seizure. So like for 30 years, I've been wrestling with this weird dichotomy. And like every time I approach a big complex problem, you end up running into the same issue. It feels like the same as it ever was.
That is so fascinating. And we've talked about this privately before, but I just made that connection because I was crippled with cluster headaches from age 22 through mid 40s. And it had all of the same kind of side effects, if you will, that you just described.
It's the same thing. Cluster headaches, migraines, epilepsy, some things that get diagnosed as psychological disorders. They're all fundamentally, misfiring issues in your brain.
Yeah. And what I think the connection I'm exploring here as we're talking, I'd never actually thought about this, and God, now you're giving me my homework for the rest of the day. I wonder if we look at people who are like us in that we just love ideas, we love going down rabbit holes, we love making connections and all that kind of stuff. I wonder what the hit rate would be on people having those types of various issues in their history, like the misfiring.
I think it's very high. Like my experience, completely anecdotally, how would you construct a study?
Right. I have two in our case.
I have met people from both circles, right? I mean, I've been, the sort of religion and things like that have been a big part of my life, raised Episcopalian. I talked to the people who sort of ask the more interesting questions in those kinds of environments, and they all seem to have some history with something medical, something mental health or neurological of some sort. And then you talk to people who are like deeply into that part of it, and they get philosophical pretty quickly too. So you come to both ends of it. And I think that's true. But like ultimately, not to get too Jed McKenna out of the box here, that comes down to everybody has their own private experience of reality. And that's just how it works, right? Mine is not yours. And that's what it is. You are a fiction on the outside of my world, and I'm a fiction on the outside of yours. And, so it makes sense to me that people who have, alternate paths shown to them, right? Like I haven't luckily had a seizure in years and years and years, thank God. But like when I was having seizures on a fairly regular basis, it's just sort of living with the sword of Damocles that hangs over your head, where there's a physical thing that will happen. I'll be on the floor doing the floppy chicken at some point, but I also know there's going to be this window where my entire understanding of reality is going to get flipped, that aura phase. And anybody who's had migraines, like even if you just have the simplest migraines where you just get that little visual effect that creeps into that is enough for a lot of people to go, oh my God, I don't understand reality at all.
Exactly. Exactly. And oh man, this is going to be great. You're going to have to come on after I do my homework and you do your homework. And like, we have like, this is cool, because the ability I have found, as you know, I work with a lot of people and trying to help them like look at the world a different way. And many people are resistant to that for obvious and good reasons, by the way. Like McKenna says, the unexamined life is not worth living, said Socrates. He goes, holy shit, man. Just trying to examine that statement makes me terrified. I don't know how I'm going to go on to life, right? And so I think that this idea of being exposed to different forms of reality. And by the way, you're absolutely right. There's a ton of them. Wilson called them reality tunnels. Adam Grant in his book calls them, or he's actually quoting a doctor who calls them reality goggles. And William Blake, if the doors of perception were cleansed, we would see the world as it is, infinite. But then you're like me. And so I was talking to a friend the other day, and he's like, I used that quote from Blake. And I'm like, and by the way, did you know that was because, do you know that Huxley used the term doors of prevention because he was a big fan of Blake's, and Morrison was a big fan of Huxley, and that's why he named his band The Doors.
The Doors, yes, I've actually heard that story before. But so
my wife is just like,
enough, no more rabbit hole. Get back up here on the lawn. Get out of that hole. Yeah, my wife does that to me about every 3 days. Usually it's when another book that weighs 8 pounds comes into the house. Luckily, I bought the last Ian McGilchrist book on Kindle because I knew I was going to have to search in it. Yeah. But otherwise, I'd need another door to put a doorstop in front of.
Yeah. I'm going to have Tom write me a summary, so I'm going to cheat.
He did a pretty good one. He did like the 1,000-word one.
I know it was good.
Which is pretty good. But your point about sort of like doors of perception, like that's a meme would be the wrong word, but that's an idea that's been getting a lot of play lately. This idea that we've got how many exabytes of information coming in, and we only process like a Nintendo 64 or something like that. Like people have done various neurological things on that, and that is just like objective truth. But the problem, I won't say problem, I'm going to guess you run into this a lot because you have these conversations openly with lots of people. It's really easy to talk to people who immediately think you're being some sort of woo-woo new age person. And me especially, because I'm a child of hippies and most people know that. And, I'm pretty left of center, although I don't talk politics very often. So people just automatically assume that I'm realigning my chakras every third minute. And I'm like super skeptical on that stuff. I won't say I'm anti all of it, but if I read a book on chakras, I'm like, great, show me the neurological study. Like, I want to understand, help me understand the connection between something 3,000 years old and 30 minutes old. I'm not dismissing the stuff that's 3,000 years old. They didn't have functional MRI. They didn't have PET scans, right? But I do think connecting those dots is some of the most interesting stuff we can do because, to your point, guys like us, to some extent, if we add value to the world, it's our ability to make connections and to dissect things that are made of parts so that we can understand how those parts are reconnected, right? That's what it's, as Tom would say, it's synthesis, right? Yep. You can't synthesize something if you don't understand how it was put together in the first place. I feel that way about houses. I feel that way about, NFTs you talk about. Like that's my experience, right? Building my own NFTs too. It's like, if you don't get, but Bree Pettis, who was the founder of a company called MakerBot, part of the maker movement 20 years ago, really, probably, has a great thing called the Cult of Done, which it's the Done Manifesto. And one of the things in his Done Manifesto, which is on the wall of my office, is that people without dirty hands are liars. And I grew up on a farm, so I just genuinely believe that when somebody shows up, like when the vet shows up and looks at the horse and says, "Oh, that horse is lame," and they haven't bothered to look, then you know that they're liars. When they go over there and they stick their hand up the what, and they say, "Oh, okay, this horse is lame," now you believe them because they've got dirty hands. And I feel that way about everything. And it's particularly challenging when you get to the stuff that bridges into this. I hate the word spiritual. I just think of it all as cogsi, right? All cognitive science. This is all just about what's going on in between my earlobes, because we do not understand any of it. And anybody who tells you we understand any of it is just freaking lying out of their teeth.
Absolutely. Or deluded. Right.
Yeah, or diluted, right? But the problem is, if you put that out there, you take a guys like us who want to deconstruct, who want to understand, and then you put something like human consciousness and experience in front of us. Well, damn it, that's hard. Like, how do you, I can't just go mint an NFT for the human brain. That doesn't work, right? So what do? You start reading the Bhagavad Gita. You start reading all the Vedas. You start digging into all this ancient wisdom. And if you can do it with a level of skepticism and understanding of the cultural context, a lot of it makes a ton of sense, right? I mean, one of my favorite books of all time is Wright's Why Buddhism Is True. Not because I'm a Buddhist, but because, but honestly, if anything, it convinced me not to be a Buddhist. And I've spent time sitting in Buddhist monasteries. Like I'm very attracted to Buddhism, particularly Zen Buddhism, for lots of reasons. But Why Buddhism Is True, Robert Wright, I think, is the author. What it does is it connects the dots to the lived experience of a modern human being in the real world who understands science. and making that bridge, I think, was really valuable to me. And what it showed me was, like, as Jed says, if you want to understand anything, sit down, shut up, and ask yourself what's true until you know. And I really think it's just that simple.
Oh, and I couldn't agree more. It's like, I was working on a thread. So I've been working, the fellow that I have up right now, Frederick Gershon. I've been working with him on some things, and because he's a really curious character, and so I sent him a piece that I'd been working on about how to practice woo-wee, right? The actionless activity, putting yourself kind of in the center of the ebb and flow of what's happening. Yeah, in the flow. And so I told him, think of this as your own personal think boy piece, because when I look at it, and I even put it right in it, this just sounds like so much woo-woo, man. And I don't like woo-woo.
Yeah.
And so that is the constant, I'm usually pretty happy to publish almost anything, right? It's like, yeah, let's just think about it. Let's think about it. But that is the paradox. And I love paradoxes. So but that's the paradox of trying to deeply understand something. And I have this idea, so Frederick was asked me, he's like, why do you do all this stuff, man? I mean, and I said, well, honestly, pragmatism when I was a kid is what drew me to Lao Tzu. I mean, as weird as that sounds, I
probably read it when I was 12. I mean,
exactly, right. And I've read it continually ever since, and all the other ones too. But the idea was very pragmatic. If you're going to have knowledge, it should indicate what you should do, right? And it should be predictive in a way of speaking, right? So that you can see your goggles maybe are clear. And that's the way I often put it to people. Listen, man, if you had a pair of glasses on right now and they were smudged up,
you'd clean them. Right. Well, but the problem is that then you start, I know you're a Tony DeMeo fan as well. You start talking about things like awareness and awakening and enlightenment. And honestly, my eyes roll back in my head, even though this is precisely the crap that I'm spending a bunch of my personal time thinking about and working with and meditating and all this. But I don't want to talk about it that way, because all I'm really trying to do is develop an operating manual for this carcass I have to pilot around for another 40 years, right? That's all any of us are trying to do.
Exactly. Human OS didn't come, the most advanced thing, at least that we know of, in the universe thus far, is sitting right between.
Oh God, I gave you a hook for Human OS. Now we're never getting out. Never getting out of this hole. But no, yeah, I mean that the desire. I mean, in Buddhism they call it bodhicitta, the way-seeking mind, right? The idea that simply asking the questions is actually the activity. That is the thing that one must do, right? And the sort of the Taoist version of this, the Wu Wei, man, it is best like water flows. Like that's my favorite translation of that. That is helpful, but I believe it personally very incomplete. Because that sort of gives me a place to stand, but it doesn't tell me what to do then, right? And then to me, I'm starting from base principles. I mean, just 2 minutes of personal narrative on this. So beginning of the pandemic, locked in like everybody else, rough time, figured some stuff out. You and I have talked about that, and you've talked about it on the podcast, like got through it. November of 2020, I got super sick, didn't get COVID. I got bit by a tick because of our mutual friend Dan Egan's terrible property in upstate New York. And I got all the things one can get from a tick except Lyme disease and was just flat on my back for 2.5 weeks in the middle of the pandemic. So I can't get into, I'm in and out of the hospital in mass, getting COVID tested twice a day, doing, MRIs and CT scans and lumbar punctures and all this stuff in the midst of COVID. It was horrible. But at the end of all of it, they still don't know what's wrong with me. So I come home and I'm in 2 weeks of isolation. So in my house, because we had a huge bunch of people, 2 weeks in isolation meant I spent 2 weeks in my bedroom by myself, period. Feverish, 103 fever for most of it. So trapped in that environment, I wasn't really able to read. I certainly didn't want to sit around and watch television. So I did a lot of freaking lying on my back and staring at the white ceiling, which sounds an awful lot like the beginnings of a meditation practice. So that's where it started for me, was like literally being in this incredibly dark, quiet place, dark emotionally, light physically, and being in that position of staring at a wall for 2 weeks, questioning my own mortality. And, from that, I just started I did what I do with any other project where I go down the rabbit hole. Was I started, and this was before I was reading any of this stuff. I started with, okay, what do I know? What do I believe? Right. I hadn't read Jed McKinney yet, so it wasn't quite spiritual autolysis, but I just started asking, what do I believe, of my own religious beliefs, my own beliefs about, epistemology and everything else, and realized I didn't know anything at all. Absolutely nothing. I actually had no basis for grounding. So I started focusing on stuff I've learned from epilepsy. And I used to get quite dramatic visual hallucinations for my auras. And so I started, okay, what do I know about vision? Start with the most important sense, the one that, takes most of my brain. And I spent a year basically trying to understand, okay, from a meditative perspective, what does vision mean? So I went through all the different visual meditations, the Hawaiian open awareness meditation and Kasina meditation and staring at the candles, and with a huge, not because I'm a believer in any of this, because I'm a huge skeptic and I just wanted to see what was on the other side. And honestly, from there, I think, that just opens the doorway to realizing how little you know about any of it. But the key thing is that parts of it are knowable, at least the personal level, right? If you take the time to do those things, and I think this is a really universal experience, and I don't think it has anything to do with spirituality. I think this has to do with the physical bodies that we live in and the neurological systems that connect them. I mean, I think about this like an epilepsy patient, right?
Sure.
And because of that, I think you can, if you want to, if you're curious enough, you can do things like change physically how you see the world. Right. My favorite one, this Jed talks about this a little bit. I'm not going to get the reference. Do you know the guy who does the headless way? The British guy?
Yeah.
Right? He goes deep, all of his stuff is about vision. So I went down that rabbit hole real early. This isn't spiritual stuff. This is about showing you why your brain is lying to you about what you see all the time. And that's I think that is, to me, a foundational practice. I've been trying to teach my kids this as well. If you can't learn how to stare at something for 10 minutes, then you have no control over your body. Literally something as simple as that. Pick one object, find a quiet room, stare at it for 10 minutes. 99% of the people I talk to either have never done that or have tried and can't.
Boy, again, it seems like we are making the journey together, because I do that all the time, because you need to, you have to, if you have to learn how to quiet your chitter chatter, so to speak. Sensory deprivation tanks. I was one of the first ones in those.
Oh, I love them things. 1987, UMass Amherst.
Yeah, baby. They used to call them Lily tanks, so after the guy who invented it.
Yep. It's right about when Altered States came out too, so everybody was tripping. Yeah, it was crazy.
Exactly, tripping balls, man.
Yeah.
And so Dorothy Parker, who had this really unfortunate life, like she was an alcoholic, she was extraordinarily depressed, she was one of the wittiest women ever to live, she was hysterical. Like when she had liver failure, and the doctors would come in, they'd say, "Miss Parker, if you don't stop drinking, you're going to die in 6 months." And she would look at the doctor and say, "Promises, promises."
Yeah.
But the point is that you've got to, curiosity, right? I almost think there might be a gene involved. I don't know, right? Because there's no cure for it. And if you are incredibly curious, what I think that leads to, because of all the people that I've spoken with who I identify as extraordinarily curious, is it leads ultimately to going, holy fuck, I don't know like anything.
I think I actually don't think it's genetic. I think it's human, and I think we kill it as a culture as fast as we can.
No doubt.
I think curiosity is the fundamental human genetic survival trait. I think it's the reason that we continue to exist. I can't remember her name. I'm sorry. I just read her book. But you had the woman on talking about, she was at one point she was talking about the amygdala, and how this was just like 3 weeks ago. And how for years we thought that was the fear center, and what it actually is, the wait a minute, something's new center. Right. And a lot of times that's fear, because usually that's a tiger. But in the modern world, like the idea that somehow we're afraid of that center of our being, because with curiosity comes fear. When I listened to her talk about that, that was an aha moment. And in her book, there's a bunch more that comes out of that. She talks about training military on mindfulness techniques. This is where the woo-woo thing breaks down. She talks about shopping for a base anywhere in the country that would let her do this work with soldiers. And lo and behold, like just enormous amounts of success from people spending 10 minutes staring at a wall. It is that simple. So highly recommended.
Yeah, that's Lisa Barrett. I think you're.
Sorry, Lisa Barrett. Yes, sorry, apologies.
Yeah. So
great episode.
Thank you. And I always try to have people on that have really different points of view, because I haven't done it myself because I'm lazy. But I sometimes give advice to, especially younger people, who are trying. They honestly are trying, because I have a fundamental belief that I can't change you. I cannot change Dave, right? I can be around, I can give you an idea, you can give me ideas, but ultimately you are the boss of you. And it's not mom and dad, it's not the government, it's not the church, it's not your family, it's you. And so that terrifies a lot of people.
There's some truth in solipsism, and it's not a happy truth.
No, it's not. And so one of the things that I often recommend is okay, you know what? Go live another life, and here's how you can do it. Start an account on Twitter and only follow people whose either ideology or beliefs or habits or what they think is fun you hate.
Oh, really? I'm going to challenge that one, but go ahead.
Okay, so the only reason for the exercise is for them to, it's a shock treatment, right?
Sure.
It's and the only reason for the exercise, and I don't recommend they do it for very long, but all the entire exercise is only for them to get that, and they usually, by the way, get it in the first couple hours. That holy shit, the exercise is to show them that every single human being on this planet has reality goggles on.
Yeah.
And
so for that purpose, I'll accept it. So look, I do that too. And I think that just as a citizen of the world, understanding where your biases are is really important. And Tom spent a lot of time on that. And great sites like Ground News are really good at sort of showing you the stuff you're not seeing because you only read, Democrat leaning publications or Republican, whatever. There's real value in that. But the flip side of that is that I found over the last 4 or 5 years personally, that the more I did that on a consistent basis, the harder I found it to find a quiet place to stand to actually do anything. Because it's so hard to tamp down the emotions that are like, because if you do that, if you set up your fake Twitter account and follow different people, or you just start reading a news source you detest because you want to understand that side of the argument, yes, you will shake your cognitive biases, but you're also going to make your day-to-day life pretty miserable because you're going to live in that conflict a lot. And I made a really conscious decision to turn that into an activity, not a way of being. Like, I make a time in my calendar to spend 30 minutes going and getting some of that stuff, and then I read it and then I let it go. Because it's real easy to get caught up in it. And if you look at a lot of Twitter, you see the people who are straddling. And sometimes great stuff happens. I know there's a lot of very rational folks out there who are very angry at everybody on both sides of every issue right now. And that anger is justified and the skepticism is justified. And I'm not trying to argue for the status quo at all. I just don't personally think I can move the needle in that arena. So I choose not to play.
Yeah, I agree with that. But as an exercise, as a first step,
100%. It's the gorilla story, right? I mean, this is the attention thing, right? Which is another whole great rabbit hole down that we should go down. But it's fundamentally the same thing, right? Attention is simply our core cognitive power. That's how I believe it, right? Because it's the one thing we actually get to control all the time is what we're paying attention to. And that Wilson makes great use of this throughout his books, honestly, about like people not seeing what's going on around them. I mean, it's a pretty heavily used comic trope for Robert and Jenna Wilson.
But also, so I was a magician when I was a teenager.
Of course you were.
But a real one. I got actually paid to do it, and I studied with a master in magician, illusionist.
You still do the tricks for your grandkids?
Yes, I do.
Of course you do.
and it's fun, but it was wonderful training because like Darren Brown. I love Darren Brown.
Absolutely. Oh my God, huge Darren Brown fan, right?
Yeah, as am I. And so I found his book Happiness, and I'm like, I should read that, because I usually have been reading him about, all of the effects that, people can have on one another, placebo effect, things like that. Things that are really interesting.
Yeah.
And so I start reading the book and I'm like, holy shit, this guy is incredibly erudite. Number one, he puts together, I think he does a better job on explaining the Stoics to a new generation. Better than anyone I've seen write about him. Like, so you and I both read the source material, right? But he does, back to your original point at the beginning of the podcast, right? Every one generation is recreating everything.
Right.
But as I'm reading it, I'm like, of course he's what he is. Of course he is.
Yeah, because that's his trained skill set, right? Like
exactly.
He spent his entire life learning how to manipulate this 2-inch cone of visual attention. Of course, he's going to think a little bit differently. Yeah,
exactly.
But to that point, right, you talk about sort of him reintroducing the Stoics to a new audience. Like, I know a lot of folks my age who I talk to about all these intellectual BS things we talk about, who get really kind of fired up about like, well, kids don't read the classics anymore. And look, I get it. I made my kids read Homer too. Like, I get it. It's important stuff. But by the same token, if you ask me to say, this person really needs to understand what the Gita is saying, the Bhagavad Gita is saying, right? There's some great wisdom there. Here are your two options. Send them the best translation of the entire thing you can find, or send them the one chapter from Jed McKenna's book where he rips apart a Bhagavad Gita study club. The latter is so much better for most people. And if they're totally hooked after that and they want to go read the source material, that's fine. But if what they want is to understand why people are still reading it, that's where you go. But that's fine. Like, I'm fine with the fact that if I hand that to somebody and that's all they ever read of it, great, because they've read something. I feel like that's just okay. I don't feel like, every year, as much content is being created effectively as existed in the previous 10, right? We're just in this incredible ramp in terms of volume. So the idea that somehow there is one canon of anything, knowledge, music, blues, violinists, whatever, that is the path of human history through a topic or a subject or an activity is ridiculous on the face of it. So, if people's only exposure to classical music is that they saw Yo-Yo Ma play at the president's inauguration, okay, better than nothing. He's still a genius, right? And if that inspires that, but like, don't diss somebody because they like Yo-Yo Ma. Like,
well, and as you're talking about Jed, I love that. I hadn't thought about it that way, and I love the one line from Jed: "Knowledge that destroys knowledge." And like, it's just like people get worked up, especially older people. Like, they're like, I'll talk to lifelong friends, right, that have been friends since we were literally in grade school together. And the odd thing is, the longer term friendship that I have with somebody, the more they easily understand why I am the way I am right now.
Well, we are all just the products of our actions at the end, aren't we, right? Thoughts, words, and deeds. That's all we can do.
I mean, right. Exactly right. That's all we can do. And like, so many people just think that that's not enough. And I'm like, not enough? Are you kidding me? If you can move the needle just a scooch, just a little bit, that's like an amazing achievement. And, simple things like every time I take a hot shower, which is every day, I say thank you to the universe, because I realize that, like, in the scope of all humans who have ever lived, the ones who can reliably turn on
a hot shower
that is hot, we've won the fucking cosmic lottery.
You're in the top 0.0001% of humans who've existed. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And it's like, I just get excited by the progress of ideas. Are they all good? Of course not. That's like, I recommend Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity all the time.
Super great.
It is, but he builds a really excellent framework for how to think about things in a certain way, right? Why optimism is better than pessimism, in my opinion. I'm not going to make a decree. Your statement of just a few minutes ago, I totally agree with. Why is it wrong? So I was the chairman of the Chamber of Music Society of Lincoln Center.
You're a huge music fan.
I love it. But I also love Journey to the Center of Your Mind by the Aboy Dukes, right? I can't think of a music. Well, I'm not a big country fan, but other than that,
we're pretty lined up there. And I'm about 10% on hip hop, but for the most part, I think we're aligned there. I tend to lean more towards punk rock than classical music, but I think we're probably pretty close otherwise.
Yeah, I also love punk rock. Yeah,
but like music is another one where it's like most of the people in my generation that I know who still love music are still ossified, right? They are captive to what they listened to when they were 17 to 25, right? Which is understandable, right? Because that's the most emotional, aggressive part of your life. You lay down all sorts of imprints at that point. Hopefully you unlearn some of them later in life. But I'm shocked at how many people I know who love music who don't listen to new music, because we're just and it's understandable, again, because of the volume that's there, right? I mean, if you just look at the raw release radar on Spotify every day, it's thousands of new songs every day, and they're remixes and remasters and reissues, but they're also just all of these kids putting out incredible music, and like the finds that are out there, the boundaries that are getting pushed that aren't even getting noticed are just amazing. And it's hard to open yourself up to that much stuff. I mean, to your point about like going and setting up a fake Twitter account and following people you hate, like opening yourself up to that kind of stuff is hard, and it gets harder and harder and harder the older I get. So I'm just pushing harder and harder against that.
So, I mean, back when we still had CDs, what I used to do is I would go into a Tower Records and buy 50 CDs at random, truly at random. And I just made sure that I was in different sections of the music. I mean, that's how I discovered techno when it was still called European New Beat. But like, I also think of guys like Eminem, like a lot of the rappers, man, 100 years ago, they would have been Walt Whitman's best friend because like they're poets as you kind of go through this whole thing. And so I always kind of tried to train myself in ways like buying things at random and trying to figure them out. We are having too much fun, and I want to get back to some actual because you are really, really bright on all this stuff, and so we got to share some wisdom. Let's get back to the metaverse, how it's affecting artists, how it's affecting traders. You had a great line in your piece. It was like, a lot of people are spending most of their time under a helmet. I love that metaphor. Please elaborate.
Right here, like there's mine, right? Like, so the metaverse is real. For people who are listening, I'm holding up a Valve Index headset, which is literally hooked on the side of my desk, which, to be honest, I actually do work under sometimes. Like, I know quite a few traders that, like, the number of Bloomberg screens you can put up in a Valve Index is shocking. Like, because you can go 360 degrees, man. Like, it's everything's up all the time. So there's real use case stuff for it too. But I do think that my biggest fear, and I'll just reiterate it to sort of set the stage here. My biggest fear is that because most of the big things we want to do are going to require a lot of money, especially if we want them to happen quickly, which we're Americans, so we want everything yesterday. That means that every time those little micro decisions about, well, if we did it this way, it would be better, but if we did it this way, it'll be faster and we'll make more money. We know which way those decisions get made every single time. And that's frankly how we ended up with Web 2.0. So what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we push back so that we start codifying some of the things we actually believe about Web 3 that are great, right? So like, the idea of like artists actually controlling the redistribution of their works, I think that's fantastic. Almost nothing that's going on in NFTs is actually doing that, but the tech is under the hood. And so for all of the degenerate NFT trading that's going on, the stuff to me that's really interesting are things like the ERC 1177, I think it is, resale rights clauses, which sound great and have huge technical problems. So let's dig into those technical problems and solve them. I'm not trying to dismiss any of these. I'm saying, great, you made a first step here at allowing an artist to attach themselves to a work of art and follow it around. That's incredible. That's a phenomenal innovation. Now let's build an ecosystem that actually lets you do it, because right now it doesn't, right? I could go ahead and sell an NFT of my song, but it doesn't help you at Spotify. It doesn't help you anywhere else in the ecosystem. I can't use it on YouTube without it getting a copyright flag, right? Like, so we haven't actually built any ecosystems that are going to help these things work. What we've done is put a technology stack way out front and then ask capitalists to catch up. And if we don't put the boundaries in place between here and there, we're going to be right where we are with net neutrality, which, to be blunt, is not good, right? It's bad for anybody working on epistemology. So not good, therefore bad. I'm missing that initial round of breaks that got put on the internet by well-meaning nerds, guys on standards committees, guys fighting for something to be a certain way. It eventually all got co-opted, but we got a good 15-year run out of it. I'd love that to happen with the metaverse. I'd love a 15-year run of people really making all of these technologies work. The VR stuff, the interoperability stuff, the embedded commerce, the embedded IP stuff, the identity as wallet. All those are great ideas. I want a 15-year run where it's not all owned by freaking Facebook and Google.
Right. My friend Alex Danko has written extensively about this, and he talks about, like why everybody needs to be a builder, why you've got to jump
Great
into
stuff.
the metaverse, how to create a Schnelling point, and it's practical stuff that I hope helps people who are in the field. Like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. I got to try it, because I agree on the point of right now it seems very siloed, right? To your point. Even if I have the greatest song in the world, let's say I'm a musician and I have the greatest song in the world and I create it as an NFT, what happens? I mean, like, so nothing, right? If I can't get, the value is in the network pretty much, and always has been in the network. That's why, you know, for all of its silliness, I still believe that Twitter has the ability to eventually emerge as the first continuously updated global intelligence network. And that's all about curation. It's all about, it's how we became friends. It's all about having the right network, right? And the siloing is a problem that we do need to like figure out. Wouldn't it be great if like my NFT started blowing up and then Toby at Spotify is like, oh, I like that. Let's see what we can do here. And
I just don't, the missing piece here is folks trying to solve this problem, not for the capital, but for the creator. So let me give you an example of one of 50 whiteboard ideas I had around this music thing. So I'm a big fan of Amanda Palmer. I don't know whether you know her work. She was Dresden Dolls, sort of semi-punk musician, quasi-performance artist, somewhat local, lives in upstate New York, was married to Neil Gaiman. So they used to perform around here all the time. So we big fans, both of them. She put out a book called The Art of Asking, which was sort of in the beginning of the Patreon and Kickstarter movement, where, you know, this idea that you put your idea out there, you get 1,000 people to give you $100 and all of a sudden you're in business. And she really digs into why culturally that's so hard for people. The technology that's being built in Web 3.0 is just perfectly built for this. And I've seen almost no examples of it. The Constitution DAO project is probably the one that was the most interesting because that was silly. Like there was never a capitalist purpose to it. It would be really cool if I was part of an organization that just bought a freaking copy of the Constitution, figured out a place to put it, and then started educating people about what it was and what it wasn't. And what, like, I'm a big patriot. I'm a big fan of the American experiment as much as it's off the rails. I thought that was a great idea. I gave him a bunch of money. Now, it didn't work, but that's a really cool idea that created a community of people who were giving money to something, not with the hope of making more money later or anything like that, but because they had a common goal, a common idea of doing something. The idea of taking what Amanda Palmer does at the Patreon sort of support an artist level and baking that into those things, that to me is interesting, right? If you told me right now that, I'm a huge fan of this guy named Carls, who's a DJ from the early 2000s, ran a site called Hipster Runoff, disappeared from the internet, runs one radio show a week on Sirius XM, and you have to listen live, basically. That's it. And he's my favorite DJ of all time. If that dude put out an NFT that said, hey, I'm going to sell 1,000 of these things. If you own this NFT, you get to show up at my website and I'll do another episode for you once a week. I would give him a significant amount of money for that, right? As a membership token NFT, which is an idea that people have out there.
Yep.
The problem is what we've done is create membership token ideas without ever asking Carls or anybody else to be part of the process, right? Like the Bored Ape Yacht Club is the perfect example of this. This incredibly exclusive 10,000 person club being made mostly out of millionaires at this point that have membership in a club that nobody has any idea what the club is, except that it costs a lot of money to join it.
Right.
It's like the worst kind of club in New York City to go have dinner. It's like the opposite of where you go in New York, right? It's like going to a place where the only thing you know about everybody who's there is they have too much money. I don't want to go to that club.
Nor do I.
But the idea of like an artist building their own community around that and using the NFT as the sort of perpetually usable token for that, I find that interesting, and I just don't see enough of that happening yet. So that's why I want to push.
Yeah, as do I. And it brings up, again, you should probably read this book by Bloom because that's what he's talking about. He's talking about what really fires up all of our innovations, all of our movements forward is our imaginations, is our desires. Is our seeking beauty, loving music, doing all that kind of stuff. That's what pushes the ball. And so like he's, and I always doubt, I'm like you, I'm really cynical about certain like, when somebody says something and I'm like, that's bullshit. But so he is thoroughly footnoting everything, right? And like in one of his earlier books I read, he'd said something outrageous, like babies have 10 billion more neurons than we do. I'm like, that's bullshit. He's got a footnote. I look at the footnote. Oh, okay, pretty much. But then I have Eric Hodel on the who's a researcher in consciousness, PhD in neuroscience, and I went, hey, will you confirm something for me? Do babies really have that many more neurons? And he goes, oh yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's look, there is a class of writer out there that I'm privileged to be able to read, right? He's one of them. Ian McGilchrist is another one. Oh my God, talk about footnotes. Good Lord. He makes David Foster Wallace look like a napkin writer. But that to me is that those kinds of writers, for guys who really want to jump in the rabbit hole, those are the most valuable people in the world, which is part of the reason I now buy all that stuff on Kindle, because I never remember when those things get mentioned and I've got to be able to search them, but I don't have the memory for it anymore.
The other thing that you brought up, though, that I think is kind of cool. So I support a young guy. He's probably 23. He's an artist here in New York. And he is the son of a woman, a designer we've worked with for many, many years. They're British. And anyway, so we met in New York, and I looked at his art. I think he's amazingly talented. And so anyway, I hear from him during the pandemic, and he's like, the thing he's doing is a charitable foundation, which is essentially a communal art space on 20th and 5th Avenue in New York City. Really cool space, loft space and everything. And so he said, can I come out and talk to you about it? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I start, like anyone, searching for it on the internet. Nothing. And so I go to Instagram. Okay. Doesn't have an Instagram account. Okay. So I go to Facebook. He's 24. I can't believe he'd be on Facebook. No, he's not on Facebook. He has no digital footprint. And so he gets here and I'm like, the first question I ask him is, Dan, what the fuck? and he goes,
who even are you?
Yeah. And he goes, exactly. He goes, we are doing our project for the ultimate, you have to be there.
Oh my gosh. I kind of like that. That's kind of fun.
And so I like you, I'm like, ooh, that sounds like my youth, but do go on. and so they had their first show. 6 artists were showing. The only way that anyone could find out, it's that area for people not familiar with New York City. Union Square is right there. NYU is there. So lots of students down there. It's a really cool part of Manhattan. And anyway, so they left little physical flyers at places that students, others go. And everything became word of mouth. And I said, well, so what happened? And he's like, 200 people came. Everyone was on their cell phones saying, no, I can't show you. I can't send you. You gotta come here, right? And so I'm like, I love it, but okay, move me on now. What's gonna happen? And that's exactly what they're gonna do, Dave. What they're gonna do is a limited to I think his first thing is gonna be 100. It's gonna be limited to the first 100 are gonna be able to share this art, but also it comes with access. It comes with, there's going to be shows just for the owners of that NFT. There's going to, I just found it really interesting in the terms of, I see, because we talked about it a lot. I said, is this something I'm missing? Is this a new thing among younger people? And he goes,
yeah, so the counter internet revolution is a real thing. I mean, my son, not to speak too out of school about him, but he's 17, almost 18, headed off to college. No social media whatsoever. He just wiped it out of his life 2 years ago. Not on my prompting whatsoever. We had, obviously you can imagine in our house, lots of conversations about the evils of the TikTok algorithm, et cetera, around the dinner table. But I never, my kids, I'm not recommending this as a parenting technique, but my kids grew up fairly feral very few rules, but the ones we had were enforced with absolute authority. And that's how I grew up too. I was a child of hippies living in the middle of the woods. So, I mean, that's kind of what it is. So very free range kids. So it was never a rule. There was never a, you can't have an Instagram account, or we need to be copied on all your social media. And I know for some parents, that's how it works for them. But for us, wildly unfettered. And both kids basically came to their own conclusion in their teenage years that no, this stuff is awful. So they pick the one place that they know they can get, they'll pick their avenue to talk to their friends. So, whether it's text messaging or a Signal group or whatever it is, but, no Twitter, no Instagram, no Facebook, none of it, no TikTok.
Yep.
And it is very genuinely a movement. I mean, I went to, I think it was right before I saw you last. I had spent a bunch of time at a Zen monastery as sort of part of like a beginners group.
Yeah.
It was all Gen Z. I mean, it was all young. It was 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, the whole thing. Like, and Tom Morgan talks about this too. There's the natural reaction to the overdominance of this sort of left brain, hyper narrow, hyper capitalist world is going to be a rejection of that, and people seeking a wholeness, right? And not in a touchy feely kind of way, in a cognitive way, an understanding way. And so of course they're going to be drawn into all of the weird cog sci stuff we talk about, right? Because where else are they going to find that? And I'm like, the only problem I have is the one that Jed McKenna brings up, which is that the spiritual industrial complex is shooting a whole generation in the foot, if you will, right? Because how many Republican voting folks in Texas do you think are showing up at their Bikram yoga and meditation class? Some, to be clear, I'm way over stereotyping here, but I'm just saying. But I'm just saying, in bluer than blue upstate New England, this stuff is endemic. When I travel to other parts of the country, it is seen as weird and freakish and left wing and hippie, and that's a problem, honestly. Which is why your guest couldn't get the military to realize, hey, 10 minutes a day we can train Marines to sleep anywhere. That's a valuable skill.
Totally agree. And like when I was still the principal sales portfolio manager for OSAM. When I left here, I always said to my wife, I'm going to real America. Because like when you live around here, right, you're in this little portion of America.
Oh, it's a bubble. It's a
total bubble. And so like I personally loved my trips to real America because it was like, wow, okay. So my entire way of like processing things and thinking about things and all that, maybe I need to think about the way these people process things.
How has that changed in the pandemic? Because I'm just thinking about this now, like a huge part of my life used to be travel.
Same with me.
I was on the road 40 weeks a year doing the conference circuit. And then pandemic hit and that just stopped. So 2 years, like this has been I've done some trips to New York and things, but I'm not one of those people who just sort of traveled their way through, which I know some people have, and God bless them. I'm jealous, but it's not where I've been at. And so my world is now limited to those people who I either get on screen, happen to meet in New York once in a while, or stumble across. So I feel like my worldview must necessarily be collapsing in an interesting way. What are your thoughts?
So actually, I've had the opposite experience because of the pandemic. I had decided around 2014, 2015 that like traditional media was dying, and like I still owe and will always give chops to CNBC. They helped make my career, and for that I am eternally grateful. But I saw it unfolding in a way that I thought was not great. Right. So when I was the co-host of Squawk Box, like every other week with Mark Haynes, we had 3 hours. If you would come on as a guest, you would have 20 minutes to tell us about this really cool new. Exactly. Right. And so it's like ESPN Sports, they ESPN'd it. And so I had kind of left that world and started to figure out the social media world. And one of the things that I always started to do when I was still traveling and going everywhere was like, oh, I really should get to know person X. Well, guess what? I was stuck just like you were in my house. And so I just started.
Yeah. So That's fair. I mean, I did a fair amount of that as well, but that was to me, it was largely self-defense because otherwise I was staring at a screen all day with nobody to talk to, right? Because I'm not going to an office, I'm not going to airports. I'm that kind of guy who used to just talk to people at the bar, at the airport. Like, I mean, I am fundamentally an introvert, but when I put myself in an outside position, I engage, right? That's how I learn about the world.
Sure, absolutely.
But the issue there is I still feel like that's a very self-selected world, right? Because
no question.
I'm just like the people that and this is going to sound unbelievably classist, but like I don't actually interact with all that many people who get paid by the hour anymore. Like when I used to travel all the time, I interact with people who got paid by the hour all the time. Now they were in certain industries that I happened to be interacting with, like retail, service, hospitality, travel, but like I have no connection to that world anymore the way I used to. Like, I mean, I used to know the names of individual gate agents in Albany, like.
Which is really, And I think that that will reemerge. And I think what you're going to see is like people like going everywhere because we are a social creature, right? And well, again, what's the worst punishment in the world other
Isolation.
than being put to death? Isolation, right?
Right, which we all just went through.
Exactly. And so I think that, you'll see more and more people going, oh, what the hell? Let's go to Tibet. Let's go to.
I hope so. I mean, just even in my local community, this is not a comment on America at large, just the people, the closest 100 people around me and that I know, I see the closing of the American mind. I see it happening in myself and fight against it every day. And so while I hope you are right, I fear that this 2 years of isolation we've just been through has probably calcified some of the worldviews of people in a way that's going to be tough to break out of.
Yeah, no, it's right. Yep. What was Beckett? Fail now, fail next, fail better.
Yeah, fail better.
So I definitely think though that like I'm a massive fan of travel. It expands your mind beyond almost anything that I can think of. Like Bhutan.
Back to the metaverse. This is the other amazing thing about the metaverse that I think people don't quite get is how much like this stupid helmet, the VR helmet thing, which I know it's fine. Be all as skeptical you want. Then go buy a $300 Oculus Quest and take it to both the oldest and youngest person you know. And in both cases, just find a couple travel videos. Doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Like if your kid is super interested in, I don't know, dinosaurs or something like that, in 5 minutes, you can go through the Oculus Quest interface and go find some video about exploring the dinosaur digs in Utah or something like that. It's absolutely mind-bending. So people who are skeptical about that stuff, travel is actually an incredible use case because, I mean, another great one. You want to see Notre Dame? VR is the only way you're ever going to see Notre Dame for real again in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Because that goddamn thing burned down. But before it burned down, a video game company did a millimeter accurate scan of the entire damn building and every piece of artwork in the place. Yep. And so you can just go run through it in VR now. Like
I've done it. It's amazing. And I've also been there. I was there.
Yeah.
Before.
But like, of course it's not the same as being there when the choir's singing on a Sunday afternoon. That's a lifetime experience. Right. But boy, you get awful damn close to understanding the wonder of human achievement by just strapping the freaking helmet on. It's totally real. Agree.
Well, the last thing I want to touch on, because man, I mean, like we could do a 5 hour, 6 hours here, but one of the other things that you talk about in your piece, which I completely agree with, but I want to hear your take on it and help our audience understand, because I think it's very insightful and helps people think about how they should be thinking about NFTs, how they should be thinking about crypto. And that is this idea that all value, right, is as my friend Rory Sutherland says, is in the mind of the one valuing it. But you put it in your piece as, okay, so there's psychological value, and then there is like intrinsic value. You can use a discounted cash flow, you can use a variety of those. But you make a really interesting point, which is, I can't think of an asset that has zero psychological value. Expand on that, please.
Yeah, the only asset that I can think of would be calorie paste. Right. Right. I mean, that's a physical object that serves one purpose, which was the maintenance of the meat shack. Right. That like maybe that would be it. But no, I first started thinking about this when I was writing about gold 15 years ago for some publication. And you know, I was trying to approach it rationally, right? Like, okay, gold, it's being used this way, has this minor industrial. So you start trying to tease out what is the value of gold. And you very quickly realize you have to say, okay, well, an ounce of gold is worth about $84 on industrial application and potential use cases there. And then whatever else is psychological value, right? Because it's not actually doing anything for you unless other people think it's doing something for you. And that brought home a lesson that I learned on the trading desk real fast. When I first got on a real trading desk in 1998, running real money for other people, and you realize just how wrong you are about absolutely everything, you realize that there is nothing but psychology going on in the market. And so when people look like, I have AMC on my screen right now. It's down 23% in the last month. It's still up 2,000% in the last year. Right. So so that's like, we've seen these incredible object lessons of why psychological value is all that's important, which is why I don't dismiss like technical traders and guys who have a system, because honestly, they'll be right for some period of time, because all technical systems, all trading systems are just ways of encapsulating psychology in a moment in time. And guys get that right for a while. They inevitably cannot get it right forever, right? Now, some things last longer than other. Point and figure charting still kind of works a lot of the time in some things. But that's a lot of ifs and buts and wars, right? So there are some truisms, but for the most part, all those systems are just reflecting psychology. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is that psychology shifts really darn fast. And the stuff that you value psychologically, the knowing that you're going to have a steady dividend stream, understanding what the companies in your portfolio do so that you feel like an owner, none of those things have any actual value. Right. The only value of any of those things is what do they do the number in your portfolio, and what are you going to do with that number in your real life? Because the number in your portfolio doesn't matter either until you turn it into, you know, a vacation or real estate or a meal or college education or something like that. The money itself is a meaningless psychological counter too. Exactly.
And it is such an illusion for people who don't understand that that's all it is. It's a symbol. And you can use it well or use it poorly.
And I think also it's really easy to forget how quickly it changes, right? I think that to me is the big lesson. And I think the one that, again, people in our generation, a certain age, need to step back and remember is like, remember how quickly things changed in 1987 and 1988. Like, remember how quickly things changed in 2000 and 2001. Like, even the global financial crisis wasn't that long ago. And our entire trading infrastructure does not work the same way it did before that.
Right.
And we just sort of like, you know, we do these massive changes to the ecosystem, and they're a big deal for about a year and a half. And then most people forget they ever happened, and they assume the way it is now is the way it's always going to be. So when people say things like, well, they'll never ban crypto, they'll never say that stable coins are just money market funds and have to register. I'm like, are you crazy? That's exactly the kind of stuff regulators do. Like Reg NMS just happened. Like, I mean, high frequency trading was just willed into being.
Which brings us right back to my science fiction treatment at our beginning of our conversation. Nixon, one of the other things he did was slam shut the gold window and say, hey, all you guys, fuck off. You can't have gold anymore. You know, and but, so...
I guess the problem I have with those things, Jim, and you and I haven't really talked about this, is like, look, I could have an opinion about the gold standard, but my opinion is utterly irrelevant. Like, unless I'm actually the president of the United States or a congressman on the Senate Finance Committee or something like that, like whether or not I care about the gold standard is absolutely irrelevant to anything I can do tomorrow to make anybody's life a little easier. And ultimately, like, I write for one audience. I write for guys who are in the business of being financial advisors, trying to help folks manage their money, and some portfolio managers who are just trying to manage the money, and some individual investors who are just trying to manage the money. my opinion about the gold standard does not make a damn bit of difference to any of those people's day today. And I get people get really fired up about these things and write books about it. And that's great because I'll go read them. But at the end of the day, let's just focus on what we can actually improve somebody's life with today.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. I think that I have never understood people who get obsessed about things like the gold standard or whatever. I think you're much better and much healthier thinking about, okay, so what can I do today that will add value? I think that's a great question to ask yourself.
Do people ever come to you and say, Jim, Pete, you have an audience, you should write about X because it would make a difference?
All the time. And,
do you listen?
No. I mean, I honestly don't. I don't look at the stats of how a particular episode does. I don't want to know because I
really don't want to know on this one.
But I am by nature a very competitive person. And if I saw those stats, I know that even if it was only subconsciously, I know that if this guest did poorly, I'd probably invite those guests or people like them fewer.
Everybody I work with is under strict rules to never tell me how much traffic any of my stuff gets. Same thing.
Brilliant.
It's like, I just don't want to know. It could be, I assume it's 50 people because that's about how many people will ever say anything about it to me. And if it's more than, it's probably more than that because I'm still employed, but I don't know and I don't care.
Same with me. And that's the only, I can add value by having people like you who I find really interesting on, and then just putting it out there. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm never going to monetize this. I'm a massively fortunate.
Who would your advertisers be? No, I'm like, seriously, like Cinnamon Toast Crunch? Like, you have to go to like deeply non-endemic advertising for this one, Jim.
I know. I can't even imagine. I love it.
It's just Cinnamon Toast Crunch all the way down.
There you go. There you go. They're gonna make me an offer I can't refuse.
So much money on Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Sugary breakfast cereal, man. It's the wave of the future. Plastics.
Well, this has been awesome. It's been as fun. Now, this is a real compliment I'm going to give you. This has been as fun as I was expecting it to be.
Oh, well, thank you. It hasn't been nearly as terrifying as I expected it to be. So,
so we ask all of our guests at the end that what we're going to do is we're going to create you the emperor of the world, but only for a day. And you can't hurt anyone. You can't kill anyone. You can't put anyone in a camp. But what you can do is incept them with two ideas that they're going to wake up the next morning thinking that idea is their own. And they're going to change the way they do things based on that idea. What two do you got for me?
Mine are really pretty boring because I know this podcast and I know some of the answers people give and they're like big and complicated and really interesting. And I'm going to say like the honest truth. If I was trying to make the world a better place, everybody would wake up tomorrow morning and instead of whatever else they were doing, they would just walk across the room to the bedroom, put a pillow on the floor and sit down and stare at a wall for 10 minutes. No other instructions whatsoever. I don't care what you do. Pray, don't pray, think about your day. Don't think about your day, but just keep your eyes open and stare at the wall. Don't look left, don't look right. Just keep your eyes open and stare at the wall. You learn so much. I mean, I know you don't have a big meditation practice, but you call it zoning out. It doesn't matter. You've got to find that time to turn off the narrative that you believe is your life. And I think that would be the number one.
I love it.
Number two, after you do that, go listen to the Brandenburg Concertos.
Oh, that sounds like my morning today.
Yeah, there you go. You're all set. No, but like truly, like I just the power of stillness and the power of music. I can't think of anything else more important.
I love it. I agree with you. This has been so much fun, Dave. And would you tell everyone where we can find you?
Easiest thing is at Dave Nadig on Twitter. I like you, Jim. I use Twitter as my office. I probably post too much for some people's things. I tend to keep it pretty tightly work oriented during the week and post weirder stuff on the weekends. Very cool. And you can read anything I write at etftrends.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much and look forward to seeing you in real life soon.
Soon. Thank you so much, Jim. This has been a blast.